Poets are always talking to things. They're talking to the sun, they're talking to trees, they're talking to people who aren't there, imaginary people, history, the future, you name it, poets talk to it. But if everything else could talk back, we might want to ask ourselves, what would they actually say? I mean, some cultures say that nature is filled with gods. There is a tree god, there is a river god, there is a god for virtually everything. And some of these gods are completely different to us. In my culture, I remember growing up, I mean, it's very normal for me, in a way, to have a gigantic monkey god, or an elephant in the form of Vishnu, or Krishna with his blue skin. And these gods act completely miraculously, strangely, surreal, wonderful, magical stories. But then there are other gods, say the Greek gods, which are actually very human. They love, they hate, they're jealous, they desire humans, they hate humans, they punish, they're petty, and though supernatural, they're utterly, utterly human. And this poem is one wherein we're somewhere in that region of we have a river that's a god, and it's not a very nice one. You shouldn't be weirded out by rivers speaking or rivers being gods. You were a child once, and you certainly spoke to all sorts of things, and imagine they spoke back. It's not a very large leap of the imagination. What's amazing about poetry is it can remind you of a time, either in our collective history, where we thought everything could speak, or your personal history, where your imagination was more vivid and that you made up little stories and songs all the time. Another note, when you're reading a poem, what I've been trying to emphasize is that in addition to reading it out loud and taking pleasure from it and enjoying it, your first job is to try to actually explain what's going on, a kind of straight reading of the poem. That's the translation and explanation of what's actually going on. Please note, I'm not saying what the poet intended. I really don't like that language. What I'm saying is, you as a reader, what can you competently say is actually occurring in the poem? Some parts of poems, and I'm the same way, I have no idea. And those parts we have to put a question mark in our annotation. For those parts we might want to return. But at the same time, I don't want you to be able to read the poem completely literally. That this is actually, for example, here, someone has murdered a girl and buried them in the river, and this is them pretending they're a god on the internet, and etc., etc., etc. When we read a poem literally, and when we try to explain every single thing, we flatten out the poem completely. We turn the poem into just a kind of code for hidden meanings that we go on the internet to find the actual meanings. And that's not what poetry is. You have to understand what's going on, but then once you get a grip with that, it's about returning over and over again to discover new things occurring. The river god has become old. And with old has come a deterioration and odor. He smells. And he seems bitter, and he seems lonely, and he seems pretty angry. But he doesn't enjoy a few things. He enjoys fish that float through them, and he blesses them. They are blessed in his religion. The fish are blessed. But what also he takes pleasure in is women, bathing women, naked women. And herein lies, within the first few lines, we learn about this, and herein lies actually a kind of major theme of the poem is this old, smelly god's relationship to women and his subsequent loneliness. He shows that he takes a great pleasure in hurting people who break rules. He plays with them, and he takes pleasure in playing and hurting them. He sings in slang, and then he tells us a story about a girl that that he basically desired so much, and never wanted her to go away. So to keep her, he hid her away. He drowned her, and she rests inside of him, and no one knows where she is. And even though everyone thinks he's a foolish old smelly river, they don't know that inside of him is this beautiful golden sleeping woman. And in the final line, he does employ again the language of religion by saying, if she did ever leave him, he'd never forgive her. And that need of possession seems to be really present in this river god. And so themes we have here include violence and possession, but also once again we get this outsider character that emerges in a lot of the character and voice poems, and the loneliness of people, I think, is another idea that